only way that I love you is if I know you love me too. That's how shallow our love becomes, but Calvary's love reached everyone. Love went deeper than the crown of thorns they placed upon his head. Love went deeper than the stripes he bore when the blood ran crimson red. Love went deeper than the hole they dug when they dropped that old cross in place. Love went deeper than the depths of hell, deep enough to take my place. No greater wrong could man have done than to take the life of my God's own Son. No greater love hath any man than to give his life for his friends. Love went deeper than the crown of thorns they placed upon his head. Love went deeper than the stripes he bore when the blood ran crimson red. Love went deeper than the hole they dug when they dropped that old cross in place. Love went deeper than the depths of hell, deep enough to take my place. Love went deeper than the depths of hell, deep enough to take my place.
All right, Daniel chapter number 6 tonight. If you found your place, go ahead and stand with me, and we'll continue, carry on our series. Pray I'll try to quit this stutter and I'll get to reading. I'm hoping to be winding down. I've enjoyed the series. I hope it's been a help to you. I hope you've been able to look at some Bible characters, maybe in not necessarily a different light, but maybe in a light that challenges us to have certain characteristics in our life. And so I think I'm winding down, but I keep finding people that I like to preach about. And so anyway, so we're just going to go and we might take a break and then come back, or we might finish. But one more definitely that I wanted to share with you, and that's tonight. The Bible said it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom. Now I'm in verse number 1 of Daniel chapter number 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the 3 princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Brother Brent, take us home in prayer if you would. Amen. Thank you for standing tonight. We've covered several characteristics and really some great biblical individuals and some great lessons to be learned over the last couple months. Really, we've been looking at this. Of course, we had Christmas and several different things. But our first message, we talked about the strength of Samson, if you remember. Of course, we've been talking about I want what they have, some particular characteristics or traits that these individuals in the Bible that we've given, that they had some special things that really stand out about them. And so that we talked about the strength of Samson. We talked about the obedience of Noah in our second message. We got down to our third message. We talked about the faith of Abraham, and we talked there about how the faith and obedience kind of went hand in hand. Then in message 4, we talked about the wisdom of King Solomon and how true it is that we need the wisdom of God. Message number 5, of course, that was around the Christmas time, and we talked about Joseph's willingness to follow. As the angel told him, fear not to take unto thee Mary, and he followed the Lord, and he just went right along with what God's plan was, and we saw the significance of Joseph. We talked about the courage of Esther, one of only 2 ladies that we talked about, the courage of Esther, how that God had raised her up for such a time as this. And, of course, she did a great work there. Then we talked about the heart of David. I don't know that you could have got through the message without talking about the heart of David. I love to study David. We're going to be looking at it a little bit more, but I love to study David, and I like to read about. David kind of gives everybody a little hope. David is kind of one of those underdog stories. When you first meet David, he's not really on anybody's radar except God's, and that's enough. And so we talked about the heart of David. We talked about the boldness of Peter in the 8th message. Then we talked about the steadfastness of Paul when he said, none of these things move me, neither count I my life dear. But Paul was going to go forward to finish his course. That was our 9th message. And then our last message, the 10th message, we talked about the devotion of Mary, how that Mary anointed the feet of Jesus, and she was there, and when everybody else was busy doing everything else, she chose the greater thing. She chose the more important thing, and so we talked about that. And so tonight I want us to continue our study with, obviously from our text, about the spirit of Daniel. The spirit of Daniel. I begin to think about this, and I'll give you this, and then we'll jump right in, but I begin to think about some of the things that Daniel encountered. Daniel didn't grow up an ordinary Israelite. At a young age, Daniel was ripped from his home. He was taken not only from his home and his family, he was taken from his country. He was inserted into a system that was trying to make him into a Babylonian. They were teaching him the language. They were working on all of these things. They were trying to shape him into a certain way, and so he got thrust, if you would, into their system. And so Daniel came up differently than anybody else. And yet Daniel, by the time you come to Daniel chapter number 6, many people believe he was somewhere between the ages of 70 to 90. And so now you're encountering an older man, yet who through the whole process had maintained an excellent spirit. Man, that speaks volumes to a man that had seen so much ruggedness in life. So many difficult times and so many difficult hardships. And yet here's a man that did not allow those things to harden his spirit, but he became and developed an excellent spirit. The other day we were getting ready to get on the airplane, and we were getting ready to fly to Texas, and we got to Charlotte, and we went through the normal airline stuff. You go in and you walk in, and of course before you can go anywhere, you got to put your mask on. And so what that interprets for me is that I got to find it. I got to figure out where I put it and which pocket did I have it in, and I know it's here somewhere. And I ain't wore it in forever, so I'm shaking it off, and I'm trying to, And so I got my mask on, and I'm got the luggage, and we got luggage here, and a backpack on here. We're pulling, we step off, and so we get into the airport. Then we got to go up and check our luggage, and so you go to the little kiosk there, and you're doing all that stuff, and they're rushing you through, and then so you get all that done, and then guess where you go? Anybody know where you go next? TSA, security. That's exactly right. TSA is a wonderful place to go. You meet some wonderful people in the TSA lines. Great people, encouragers, filled with joy, filled with happiness, and just make you really feel better about yourself. And they see thousands of people today, and it's like they're prodding cattle. It's like they're pushing cattle. If you ever watched anybody do that, you ever get those stubborn ones, and they don't take a lot of time with them. They just poke them and prod them until they turn around. That's how it feels like going through TSA. You don't have your shoe? Get your shoes off. You got to take your shoes off. And so we was going through the TSA line, and you got to take your shoes off. You got to empty your bags, and you got to take everything out of your pockets, and you got to take your false teeth out, and you got to take your contact lenses out. And if you wear a toupee, make sure you put it in the same. Can't put it in there with your backpack. That's got to be separate. Your laptop's got to go in this one. Your shoes has got to be here. Take your belt off. You hold the cash. Don't leave your wallet there, because we might all be. You just got to go through this whole thing. And by the time you go through, you're mad, they're mad, everybody's mad. It's just inevitable. It's going to happen. We had a first the other day. We walked to the TSA line, and really there wasn't nobody there. It wasn't that busy. We just walked right up. But there's something within me. Now, maybe y'all not this way, but there's something in me. It's like, man, when you step into that TSA line, it's like you're in a race. I got to get my ID out, got to get my phone out, got to scan it, got to put my mask down, that's me. Got to get it all back. I'm just wide open, and ain't nobody behind me. Do you feel like that ever? I've been rushed so long, I feel like you can't do it unless you're doing that way. Unless I'm running sideways with one shoe on and one shoe off, I don't think I can even go through a TSA line. And we got up there and walked through, and the little guy, give him my ID, and half the time they want your boarding pass, and half the time they don't. I can't keep up with them. And we got in this line, and take your belt off and the whole thing. We got it all ready, and you go stand up, before the little jumping jack machine. It looks like you come down on jumping jacks, and you stand there, and and they tell you to come in. And this one lady was different. She was different than any TSA agent I've ever met in my life. You know what she did? She smiled. I didn't know their face could do that. I really did. I didn't know they could smile. And not only was she was friendly, like she was from the South. And she didn't tell us to go through. She invited us to come. Y'all step this way. I didn't know they was allowed to do that. And we got through, and she was smiling. And I think, Libby can tell me, I think she told us that she hoped we had a good trip. I've never, ever in my life. We got through there, and I'm still racing. I'm still running. I got shoes to put on. I got backpacks to get. I got stuff to do. I got to hurry. I don't wear shoes that can tie. When I go through TSA, I cheat, and I usually take all my stuff and go over, then I get dressed someplace else out in the lobby because I don't want nobody pushing me in my business. Libby stops and turns around, and she said, ma'am, I just want to tell you, I think you're the nicest TSA agent that I've ever met in my life. And that lady just smiled, and she said, well, that's what we're trying for. And I'm telling you, brother, I have never in my life met another TSA. You know what was something about her? She had an excellent spirit. I mean, she just had a spirit about her. It didn't make me feel like that I was getting ready to get took in a back room and questioned because I was a terrorist. I wasn't worried that they was going to search my bag and somebody had put something in my bag I didn't know was there. Like them little, I didn't worry about that. I mean, I really felt like when she said have a nice day, she meant it. Now, sometimes I feel like they mean have a nice day and I hope you drop dead and die and don't ever come back through my line. But I mean, she had a great spirit about her. And her spirit was noticed by us. And her spirit, I can promise you this, affected our spirit. It was refreshing. Because I'm telling you, it can work the other way around too. Their bad spirit can affect my spirit. And before long, we ain't of kindred spirit. You say, well, preacher, what are you trying to say? I'm telling you, she had an excellent spirit, and she made a difference in somebody's life. My kids had a K-4 teacher that, not all my kids had her, but I think 2 of our kids had her. And, you just don't meet a sweeter lady. She has got an excellent spirit. She's always smiling. She's always encouraging. She genuinely loves the people. I wouldn't call her name to embarrass her, but I'm telling you, she's just got an excellent spirit. I will call this one's name, you've heard me say it, Miss Gibson has got an excellent spirit. And just being around, it's like, man, how do they stay that way? How are they around people and still like people? How do they maintain that spirit in the midst of, and listen, I know these people have been hurt. I know these people have been done wrong. I know there's things and yet somehow within them, they maintain an excellent spirit. Well, here was a man by the name of Daniel that the Bible says has an excellent spirit. The word excellent means this. It means preeminent or surpassing. Preeminent or surpassing. In other words, his spirit was way up here. It surpassed what the average spirit was. It surpassed what the average demeanor was. It surpassed, if you will, what the average behavior would have been. In fact, we see that his spirit is what distinguished him above the others. Now, there's a word for that. It's called he was preferred above the other princes. That word preferred means he was distinguished. You've met people, right, listen, when I get picked up at the airport, it's usually somebody says, hey, get in the car. But you've seen the ones, they hold the signs. We got off the airport in Vegas. Now, I know what those signs meant. The signs meant, that's them high rollers. That's them ones that said, we want your money. And they're holding signs, Mr. So-and-so or so-and-so. Ain't nobody held a sign for me. You know why? They know I was broke as a joke. I didn't have no money. I didn't have 2 quarters to put in the slot machine in the airport. I wouldn't have. Take a deep breath. I wouldn't have. But I mean, I'm not distinguished. But man, Daniel was distinguished, or he was preferred. Why? Because he had an excellent spirit. Because he had an excellent spirit. We as people are known not for just what we say, but for how we behave. And I'm going to tell you, that's a sobering and a scary and a humiliating statement. I've been ashamed of myself. I was ashamed of myself the other day. I got mad at the mailman. Just the other, Dad was there. I mean, I was mad at the mailman. Upset. Some of that can be a felony if it goes too far. He pulled up and we got a new mailbox we've had, I don't know, a year, and the whole lid, an expensive one, and the whole lid fell off twice. I fixed it. Apparently not good enough. It had Loctite on it. The next time I fix it, you can mark her down. And I looked up there and I told Dad, I said, I got to fix that thing. And I looked up there and he'd opened the lid on it, and the whole thing fell off, and he just left it there and drove off, and it just flew all over me. And I was on my way out there, and the only thing I could think of is I got to get his attention. And I whistled, and I said, "What are you doing?" And man, it hit me. It's like, you're an idiot. Because my excellent spirit went out the window. And no sooner as I went and got my mail, you can't make this stuff up. No sooner as I went and got that mail, you know what was in there? There was a birthday card to Pastor Chris Cantrell. Now, I'm going to tell you something. If that don't sober you, you say, "Preacher, you're an idiot." You're right. You're right. I'm telling you. But you say, what'd you have to do? Stop and pray? Ask God to forgive me? Because, I don't know if the guy heard me or not, but I tried my best to get him to hear me. I was standing in the middle of the road with my hands up as he stopped and put mail in Dad's mailbox, hollering at him. He said, "Preacher, I'm ashamed of you." Guess what? So was I. But Daniel had it. We're known for our spirit. For our spirit. Now, whether we like to admit it or not, probably most all of us have had those moments that we look back and say, "Oh man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I wouldn't have typed that, or I wish I wouldn't have hit send, or I wish I would have just kept my big mouth shut." But I'm going to tell you, Daniel was known because he had an excellent spirit. Now, I just told on myself, and that's obviously not in my notes. But I can tell you that's proof positive for me when I say this statement. Man, I want what he had. I'd love to have what he had, to not have to go back and apologize to God and say, "Lord, I'm an idiot, and I apologize. God, would you forgive me? I could have hurt the cause of Christ. I could have hurt my own testimony. God, forgive me." Now, I am grateful for the conviction of the Holy Spirit of God that he does let me know when I'm an idiot. Amen. I'm thankful for that, because I'm an idiot more often than not. Now, I don't give you the liberty to call me an idiot, but I know me. I'm telling you, I know me, and I live with me. And most of the time, I don't even like me. And I'm grateful for that. But this spirit of that was said about Daniel, that's the kind of spirit I want to have. That's the kind of demeanor I want. I want to be set apart in a good way. I want to be described in a good way, and Daniel was that way with his spirit. I wonder in what ways are we distinguished by our spirit? That might not be a good thing. As people think about, as our names are mentioned, how are we distinguished? Because they're going to remember your spirit and the actions of your spirit more than they are what you say you are. What are we distinguished? How are we known? What distinguishes us by our actions? Listen, I'm not talking about this, by the way. I'm not talking about having a reform of the flesh. I'm not talking about putting on a show on the outside and you're still corrupt on the inside. I'm not talking about that. Anybody can change. Anybody can clean up their act and be on their best behavior for a little while. I'm talking about a genuine, excellent spirit that's there whether we're by ourselves, whether we're in front of 1,000 people, or whether we're around 10 people. How's our spirit? Because Daniel had a great spirit and I want it. Now, let me show you some things tonight that I hope that'll help you. These are just practical things, and I hope that it'll be a help to you. I hope it'll be something that'll challenge you, and may it make us all better for the glory of God. First of all, Daniel's excellent spirit was distinguished in the face of unfavorable circumstances. in the face of unfavorable circumstances. Daniel chapter number 6, verse number 4, the Bible said, Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. He was distinguished in the face of unfavorable circumstances. It would be easy to claim that our spirit would be different under different circumstances. You say, preacher, what do you mean? Well, if I was in a better position, I'd have a better spirit. If things wasn't always so hard and I'm down at work and I've got all of these pressures and all of these trials and I've got all of this, if all of this would go away, then my spirit would be better. If I didn't have financial troubles that was piling up and piling up, my spirit would be better. Now, it's easy to convince ourselves and things of that nature. That, well, if the circumstances was better, my spirit would be better. Here's one. If I didn't have to be around dumb people, my spirit would be better. I mean, I've said this before. I don't have a problem with people. I just don't like dumb people. Now, if y'all are honest, you feel the same way. And it's just people that push your buttons. And it's just like, did you put your brain in your head when you got out of bed this morning? I mean, did you shove it in there and just put it to work, turn it on? Well, if I didn't have to be around this person or that person, my spirit would be, but you don't understand, my spirit is their fault. Absolutely not. If everybody was like me, the world would be a better place. Now you think about it, we'd never say that out loud, but we think it. Won't they? I wouldn't. Now how do you know you say that? I wouldn't do it that way. So in other words, if everybody does, but at the same time, when you mess up, boy, we need grace. We're just human. We're just human. And he said, preacher, what are you saying? I'm telling you, listen, he had an excellent spirit in light of unfavorable. So you say, well, preacher, I don't understand. Daniel had a favorable position. Yeah, well, yeah, he did. Yet we find that the circumstance of his life was still unfavorable. Here's a man that had the position. Here's a guy that had the authority. Here's a man that not just one king, but many kings had promoted him to this level that he would, listen, we're talking about a supervisor. We're talking about someone who would be considered like a statesman in our day. Up on Capitol Hill, that echelon of person. And so we're talking about somebody that he had, and yet he had a whole team of people conspiring to get him killed and to get rid of him. And in the middle of that, here's a man that kept an excellent spirit. Daniel had circumstances in his life that was unfavorable. Daniel had good friends. Well, if I just had better friends, was around better people, then I'd have a better spirit. Daniel had the good friends. But yet in the midst of that, he had to deal with those that was jealous and envious of him in his position. Go back to chapter number 2, and you don't have to turn back there if you don't want to, but you find out that he had a good relationship with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or as they're better known, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Daniel had good friends, other friends who took a stand. But just because Daniel had good friends and his situation doesn't mean that life was all rosy. Because he still had to deal with jealousy. He still had to deal with backbiting. He still had to deal with bitterness. He still had to deal with all of those, even though he had a good group of friends, life still happened. Life still happened. And so he was still going to have choices to make. He had to deal with circumstances that were created and those who sought and plotted, listen to this, his demise. We're not talking about enemies who just wanted him to be still. We're talking about enemies that was okay if he's killed in order to be silenced. I mean, after all, they had him thrown in the den of lions. Okay, they were serious. It wasn't just, well, they just want a pay raise and, well, I don't want nothing bad to happen to you. I just want to, no, they were serious about it. All right, and Daniel had to deal with that type of people. And in the midst of that, the Bible said that Daniel had an excellent spirit. Daniel had the favor of God and of kings. I mean, if anybody had position, power, and authority, it was Daniel. And yet Daniel faced some of the darkest days. And yet in the midst of all of those things, kept his spirit. We're always going to deal with unfavorable circumstances. Listen, we must not allow, and I told you I'm preaching to me as much or more so than I'm preaching to you. Listen, we can't allow those circumstances to either to ruin or to rule our spirit. We can't afford to let that happen. Again, I'm grateful for the conviction of the Spirit of God that shows us when we're wrong so we can get things right. But I'm telling you, we've got to be in the position and the mindset such as Daniel had, that those things are not going to control me. Listen to this quote. Former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Benjamin Disraeli said, and I might have said his name wrong, circumstances are beyond human control, but our conduct is in our own power. Circumstances are beyond human control, but our conduct is in our own power. Daniel chose to have an excellent spirit. Daniel is proof that someone can keep purity of Christian life and fervor of Christian communion in the face of unfavorable circumstances. Man, Daniel had it, and I want it. Because life sometimes is going to be hard. Life sometimes is going to be difficult. Life sometimes is not going to be fair. You say, well, preacher, wait a minute. You talk about fair. Daniel was promoted as a Hebrew child up to the head of the Chaldean. Daniel was taken from his home. Daniel was ripped from his home, ripped from his family, ripped from his loved ones, ripped from his society, ripped from his culture. And so when we think about, oh, Daniel had great power, understand, Daniel had been robbed of what an ordinary childhood would have had. That's like saying, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to rip you out of here. We're going to take you away from your family. We're going to take you away from your loved ones. And we're going to take you to North Korea, and they're going to put you in government and say, here's a little bit of money. To where you're always under a scrutiny. You know, one wrong step, they didn't have any problem killing them. The den of lions was made for those that upset the king. Study in history, if you'll look, that's the purpose. It wasn't just because it was a petting zoo. It was a place that they put people that upset the king. It didn't take much. Now, listen, as we think about what one person calls favor, another person calls captivity. And yet he chose to make a decision that he was going to have an excellent spirit. All right, second of all, Daniel's excellent spirit was displayed in the revealing of different situations. It was on display. In other words, it wasn't something that Daniel went around boasting that he had, but it was something that was on display that he had. Now, I'll show you this. There's two different scenarios. First of all, his excellent spirit can be seen in the event of his life prior to this occasion. In other words, what happened before? What happened before he got to Daniel chapter number 6? Now, the timelines, by the way, the timelines of Daniel kind of bounce sometimes. All right, but he had different rules in different kingdoms and different times. All right, so first of all, the testimony of others, particularly the queen. Let's go back to chapter number 5. Back in chapter number 5, and just a page back, down in verse number 10, the king had a problem. Something happened. If you remember, they was having a big party. They was having a big feast. And the king decided, hey, it'll be a great idea. Let's go down into the treasure house and let's bring out all of those, the plates and the cups and all that we took from the temple before we destroyed it, the temple of Solomon, before we went in there. And they got all those cups, and they began to party with those cups. They began to drink their wine on the vessels that were consecrated to be used only in the temple. And they went in and they used those, and all of a sudden in the middle of that, there was that finger come down and begin to write on the wall, meeny, meeny, tickle you farson. All right. King got a little upset about that, got a little troubled. As a matter of fact, if you ever want to know where it comes, where that person, man, they were so scared they were knocking at their knees, it came from him. The Bible said his knees was out of joint. I mean, there he is, the king. He's sitting at the table having a big time, and all of a sudden a hand appears, starts scratching on the wall, words he can't read, and he's figured, okay, this is not good. He had a problem. And the queen stepped up and said, hey, wait a minute. She said, now, the queen by reason, down in verse number 10 of chapter 5, by reason of the words of the king and his lords came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. Now, again, they were polytheistic. They had a little issue with the one true God. And in the days of thy father, or grandfather, if you will, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him. With whom King Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Said, man, he really promoted him in his kingdom. Maybe you ought to hear him out. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show thee the interpretation. All right, so the events prior to this was seen or prior recorded, if you would, in Scripture, that Daniel proved himself in the way he handled himself to have said excellent spirit. The track record of his accomplishment, what happened. He went in and he showed him this. By the way, I'll give you this. Oftentimes that excellent spirit goes hand in hand with what the Bible calls as wisdom. And when you think about that, most of the time, if we'll display an excellent spirit, you know where it comes from? It's because we're displaying, we got some wisdom about a matter. We thought about it. We didn't just go off on the deep end. But here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. The task seems to go hand in hand with wisdom. Look now what the king says when he brings Daniel in verse number 14 of chapter number 5. I have even heard of thee that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. All right, now it's different words, okay? The word spirit and the word wisdom, they are different Old Testament words. All right, but when we look at how they go hand in hand, it would seem as if an excellent spirit and a spirit with excellent wisdom go hand in hand in how they bring themselves out or how they are on display before people. All right, let me give you this verse. Proverbs 17:27, we'll move, says this. He that hath knowledge spareth his words. Man, there's a mouthful. He that hath knowledge spareth his words. And a man of understanding, okay, understanding, knowledge, wisdom, is of an excellent spirit. Now that's what Proverbs says. And so they go, it would seemingly go hand in hand, if you would. And so Daniel's excellent spirit was displayed of prior events. But it can also be seen by the way he handled the situation in our text. Now let's get back to chapter 6. Now, although we're not really going to deal heavily with the most famous portion of chapter number 6 in the message tonight, it is significant to prove our point about his excellent spirit. The main probably preached passage is Daniel in the den of lions, in Daniel chapter number 6. All right, we're really not going to touch much on that tonight other than the fact that Daniel did get thrown into the den of lions in spite of his excellent spirit. Okay, and maybe as a token of that excellent spirit, because he behaved himself with wisdom and handled himself in a certain way, that he was promoted because of that spirit, and they hated him for it. All right, and so the main portion of that is the account of him in the den of lions. But I do want to point out a couple details about it. First of all, just because you have an excellent spirit, you have the favor of God and man, doesn't exempt you from having difficulties in life. Well, if my spirit would just be better, everything would be perfect. No, just the parts that you mess up would be. Just the time that you stick your own foot in your mouth, those things would be better. Those things would be better. But the other situations and circumstances in life, you can't control those things. Okay, so it's not as if you're saying, okay, well, if my life will get easier from everybody from outside sources. No, Daniel's life got more difficult. Okay, so don't misunderstand. This is not a health, wealth, prosperity type message. It's just a reality that we need to behave ourselves with an excellent spirit. It did not diminish, even though that he went through these things and got thrown in the den of lions, it didn't diminish his excellent spirit in spite of that. Now again, I'm telling you, God was on him. I don't know how else to describe it. If they would have ushered me out to the edge of those stones and that den line and pushed me in, I'd have probably been a tad upset. I mean, I'd have probably been a little bothered. You know, you might have heard, if I ever get out of here, I mean, we're wired that way, right? Maybe you're not. I hope not. But I'm telling you, I know me. But man, Daniel he kept an excellent spirit. You know, I think here, if we'll work on developing an excellent spirit before those time comes, when those time comes, it'll be easier to keep it than it will be to try to find it. He didn't just wait until that day and said, you know what, I better shape up a little bit. No. It already happened way back, and we'll see that here in just a minute. But listen to this, and I'll hurry. The words of Daniel while still in the den of lions reveals and assures us that he really did have an excellent spirit. Now, I want you to listen to these words that he says, but I want you to, before we read them, before I tell you what verse we're going to read, I want you to think about something. When he says the words that we're getting ready to read, they didn't just help him out of the den of lions. He's still down in there. Now, there's a difference. There'd be a difference for me. And we know from reading of the text, we know something about these lions. It's not that they just weren't hungry. Do you realize when all of his accusers got pushed in, they had them broken and consumed before they hit the bottom? Their whole families. They's hungry. And Daniel is in this den filled with these lions. And I don't know if he's asleep or awake. I wasn't there. I don't know. But I can just kind of imagine him kind of sitting there looking at him. I mean, you can see them pictures of them lions, right? You know how they do? Now, in my mind, if I'm Daniel, I'm thinking, that dude ain't bit me all night, but sure as the world. If you leave me here 2 more hours, that joker's going to eat me for breakfast. You know, I ain't saying nothing till you get me up out of here. I mean, that's how, would you not think that way? Come on, be honest, but put yourself, we're talking about real people. When you read the Bible, you're talking about real people. We got to stop over-spiritualizing this stuff and understand these are ordinary human beings just like we are. Man, I'd have been like, you got to get me out of here. He comes to the king. Daniel, what? I'm still, get me out of here. But he asked Daniel, is thy God? We know the account. But I want you to listen. We're talking about his spirit. Now, I'm not really preaching on him being in the den of lions. But he makes this statement. The king arose. And by the way, they tricked the king. He was sick about it. He didn't want to put Daniel in there, but you know that law of the Medes and Persians that can't be altered? He was upset. Tried to figure out a way out, and he couldn't. But the king arose very early, verse number 19 in the morning, and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Now listen to what Daniel says. Then Daniel said unto the king, O king, I hate your stinking guts. That's not what he said. He said, O king, live forever. How do you do that? This guy threw you in a den of lions. He stood there and watched his servants. Listen, talk cheap. Daniel, I'm sorry. Daniel, I don't want to do this, but. And yet Daniel said, O king, he said, live forever. He's still in the den of lions when he said it. I'm going to tell you, that's evidence to me that Daniel really genuine. He wasn't just putting on a show on the outside. That's who he was on the inside. I want that kind of spirit. I want the kind of spirit that I can maintain my relationship and my walk with God in the midst of some of the most difficult days of my life. And Daniel had that. Daniel had that excellent spirit. He spoke in kindness to the king in verse number 21, but he spoke in testimony to his God in verse number 22. My God hath sent his angel. Oh, Daniel, can your God? Absolutely, my God can. My God sent his angel, closed their mouth. I ain't had any trouble. We've had a good night. Good morning, king. Hope you slept well. What did he do? His excellent spirit provided an opportunity to talk about his wonderful Lord. Man, if I could have the right spirit, it would give me much more opportunity to talk about how wonderful my God's been. I need the spirit that Daniel had within him. Daniel's excellent spirit was developed, and I'm done, over a period of time. I'm going to give you these quickly. You say, over a period of time. That's right. Yeah, we can develop our spirit. We can develop it. Believe it or not, mine is much better than it used to be. Now listen, I laugh, but the only way I know to do is just to be honest and be real before you. If I don't do that, I'm just a hypocrite, and I'm not trying to boast on the stupid things that I've done. That's just it's fitting to me. But as Daniel grew in the Lord, I want you to see some things. Where did it start? Because it's going to answer the question of how do I get it? I want it, but how do I get it? Can I really have it? Or is it just something that super spiritual people can have? No, it's something that everybody can have. It's something that everybody can. Where did it start? I believe it started with Daniel 1:8. It started with purpose. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. It started with purpose. If you want it, you got the purpose in your heart to have it. You got the purpose in your heart. There's more important people in life besides you, and that's God. Somebody's more important than you, your wants, your wishes, your desires, your comforts, your health, your promotion. And Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile. God, I'm going to keep myself pure for you. It's going to start with purpose. Next, we can work on our practice. In back in Daniel chapter number 6, verse number 4 and 5, the Bible tells us that Daniel behaved with fidelity and integrity. In other words, Daniel lived his life. Now, I'm not talking about the spiritual fashion. I'm talking about normal, everyday interaction. Daniel lived his life with integrity and with fidelity. Look at the verses. They were looking to find something on him. Man, where can we trip him up? I know listen, this Hebrew, he's backbit the king. He's done something against the king. We're going to find it. He's acted crooked. He's not carried through his orders. He's not done his job. Somewhere we're going to listen to what the Bible said. Then the presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion or fault. And I promise you this, they looked at him. They watched him every day. You talk about being under scrutiny, under the microscope, in a fishbowl. Daniel lived in it. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. That's a mouthful. He lived an ordinary, normal life and was faithful. He was faithful to God, but he was faithful to his king. He was faithful to carry out his duties like he was supposed to. Listen, he put in an honest day's work. He didn't try to cheat the system. He didn't take 15 more minutes after the lunch break. He was faithful. You say, preacher, what do you mean? It's how he practiced and carried himself. All right, so good place to start is purpose. The next thing we work on is our practice. What about this? We can develop some things in our priorities. You know, the Bible tells us in chapter 6, verse 10 and 11, we know the verse, right? When Daniel knew the writing was signed, he went up to his room, opened his windows, prayed 3 times, kneeled before God and prayed 3 times a day. All right, what is that? We see its priorities. The development, we see it's a development in our relationship with God. Can I ask you a simple question? Are you really working on your relationship with God? I'm afraid sometimes, and man, I'm out of time. I'm afraid sometimes that we treat our relationship with God like we do our relationship with our spouse. You know, once we're married a certain time, if we're not careful, we'll stop working on our marriage. If we're not careful, we'll stop with the gestures of, you know, I love you, or hey, I'll see you later, or would you have a good day? And before long, we'll start taking each other for granted. I mean, you know what it's like. You know, when you first meet, you know, oh, you're smitten, you're in love. And oh, I got you flowers. Why'd you get flowers? Just because you're the greatest person ever. I just thought about you all day. I couldn't wait to get home. And now you walk through the door, it's like, yeah, you're here. I mean, you say, preacher, what are you trying to say? If you don't work on that, that's why we have couples nights and marriage retreats, and we have all of these things. You know why? Because if you're not careful, you'll get stale and you'll get stagnant, and somebody will come along and try to fill that gap. I ain't preaching on the home, but that's good preaching on the home. But if we're not careful, the same thing will happen in our Christian walk. We'll begin to grow callous. We're not worked on our relationship, and all of a sudden we'll begin to take it for granted. Well, God will always be there even if I don't talk to Him today. Are you with me? Daniel shows that he had a walk and a relationship with God. You see Daniel faithful in his prayer. 2 words, prayer and supplication. One is used on behalf of, the other is asking for favor for. He was asking God, God, keep me in your favor. God, continue to show me your favor. God, I need you in my life. I need you in my function. I need you in everything that I do. You can go to Daniel 2:8. Probably many instances like Daniel 2:18, they was going to be killed. He goes to his friends and said, hey, you guys got to help me pray. He's going to wipe out all of us. He's going to kill us all. Pray and ask God to give us the vision. And God did. Then we must utilize our power, and I'm done. You say, preacher, what kind of power? Proverbs 25:28 says, he that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that's broken down without walls. You know what that verse implies? It implies that you have a choice in how you behave yourself. I have a choice in how I behave myself. In other words, I can have the power to choose to act and behave a certain way. Which tells me that Daniel made a choice to have an excellent spirit. Daniel just didn't wake up one day and say, well, I was born with it. I'm just a wonderful guy. Now, listen, you can't tell me that Daniel didn't struggle with anger. Can't tell me that Daniel's flesh didn't struggle with wanting to get even and with wanting these guys to get what's coming to them. But yet Daniel made a choice to control his spirit, and that's how he had an excellent spirit. I'll give you the quote again from the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Circumstances are beyond human control, but our conduct is in our own power. Daniel had an excellent spirit. Daniel behaved himself with great excellence, showed a lot of wisdom. I want what he had. I need what Daniel had. And I want God to help me each and every step of the way, and I hope you will as well. Let's stand tonight. Heads are bowed.